by and large, it will be a dry and bright day, and that will set us up for a chilly start to Saturday, but some decent sunshine around before some pretty windy weather arrives again on Sunday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, the development of a controversial UK oil field has been given the go-ahead. Should it have been? And speaking of things being approved, we're about to see the UK's first ever consumption room, which will be used by people taking illegal drugs like heroin and cocaine. What do you make to this? Good idea? Will it help those who are indeed hooked, or is it the start of a slippery slope? And over in Greece, they are going to let undocumented migrants work. Here in this country, we've got a shed load of vacancies and more people off sick. What do you reckon then? Should we be doing the same in the UK, getting those migrants to work and help boost the economy, get them out of the hotels into the workforce? You tell me. And Northern leaders, they are not having any of it.
We're just not going to lie down and accept the way Whitehall's always treated the north of England. We are fighting back.
He's fighting back. There's talk there about scrapping potentially the northern part of HS2. What do you think about that? Are they letting the north down? Is it time to scrap the whole thing? What about Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS3? Do we need that in the north? Give me all your thoughts. But first, let's grab tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. A 15-year-old girl has died after being stabbed in Croydon in South London. She was on her way to school. Emergency services were called to Wellesley Road at 8:30 this morning. One eyewitness describing seeing a bus driver and a passerby trying to resuscitate the teenage girl. She was a student at the Old Palace School for Girls. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested. Police say he was known to the victim. Well, in other news today, 5 Labour mayors from across the country have met in Leeds today to urge the Prime Minister to stay on track with HS2. They warn that failure to deliver in full will leave vast swathes of the north with Victorian rail infrastructure unfit for purpose. Rishi Sunak faces a political backlash, though, over reports he's considered axing the section between Birmingham and Manchester amid soaring costs. London Mayor Sadiq Khan says there are huge benefits to HS2.
I'm really pleased to have been invited by the cross-party Transport for North to their board meeting this morning. We may be mayors from different regions, but we speak with one voice when we say we don't want cuts to high-speed 2. We see the benefits of high-speed 2 in relation to economic growth, in relation to increase in capacity, increase in connectivity, increase in speed. And it means we can have the same sort of transport links that France has, that Spain has, that Germany has. I'm worried that cutting high-speed 2 will cause huge damage to London and the South East.
Sadiq Khan. Now, this company, GBNews, has suspended its presenter, Dan Wootton. It comes after offensive comments were made by Lawrence Fox during an interview on this channel last night. He made a series of derogatory remarks about journalist Ava Evans, who's a political correspondent for the news website Joe. Presenter Lawrence Fox has also been suspended with immediate effect and taken off air. In a statement, GBNews called the comments unacceptable and said it'll be conducting a full investigation and issuing a formal apology to Miss Evans. The UK's largest untapped oil and gas field, Rosebank in Scotland, has been approved for development. That's despite a row over climate damage. Regulators say net zero considerations have been taken into account. But Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, says he's disappointed the project's been given the go-ahead. The UK government has welcomed the decision, saying it'll raise billions of pounds. The United Nations has rejected the Home Secretary's calls for international law on refugees to be changed. In a speech yesterday in Washington in the United States, Suella Braverman suggested that the United Nations 1951 Refugee Convention needed updating. She argued fearing discrimination for being gay or a woman shouldn't be enough to qualify for international refugee protection. Lucy Fraser, who's Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, said the problem does need a global solution.
Is, as the Home Secretary was saying, a global issue that needs global solutions. You know, the UN have stated that since that by the end of 2022, there were 108 million people displaced. So, you know, we, as you will know, as a government, are working very carefully to make sure that we stop the boats coming over here through international solutions.
The UK's first drug consumption room, where users can take illegal drugs under medical supervision, has been approved. The facility, planned for Glasgow's East End, is backed by the Scottish Government as a new way to tackle the country's debilitating drugs deaths crisis. The £2.3 million pilot will allow users to take their own illegal drugs in a hygienic environment with medical staff on hand. Now, yellow weather warnings are in place for most of the UK from midday today. In fact, it went into place as Storm Agnes, the first storm of the season, makes landfall in the United Kingdom. The coast expected to be whipped by winds as high as 75 to 80 even miles an hour. The Royal National Lifeboat Institution has issued a warning telling people to keep a safe distance from water and cliff edges as high waves pose a potential threat to life. So 2 yellow rain warnings will also be in place in parts of Scotland, the worst of the storm expected to hit at around 9 o'clock tonight. Whisky, thought to be the oldest in the world, will be sold at auction for £10,000 per bottle. The tipple was found hidden behind the doors of Blair Castle in Scotland, and they found around 40 bottles believed to have been distilled almost 200 years ago. Auctioneers are saying the bottles will most likely have a more medicinal than whisky taste to the samples, if you can bear to open one at £10,000 a pop. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. That last story about whiskey, that's a drink I've never, ever been able to enjoy. I don't know if it's my unsophisticated palate, but it's not for me. And the first story there about that 15-year-old little girl, can you imagine being those parents? You send your child off to school on the bus. You expect them absolutely to return home safely. What is world coming to when you've got 17-year-olds accused of stabbing 15-year-olds? We had, didn't we, Martin Costa on our show on Friday. Do you remember his son, 16, was stabbed by a 17-year-old? There's no winners in any of that. I don't know what we need to do to get through to kids to stop carrying knives. It will never end well. Any ideas of how you stop this stuff, please get in touch. I'm all ears. But for now, I'm with you till 7, and alongside me, the columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, joins me, as does the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Good evening, gentlemen, to both of you.
Good evening.
You know the drill, don't you, on Dewbs & Co as well. You can get in touch with me with whatever is on your mind tonight. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you get hold of me, or you can tweet me if that's your thing, X me or whatever we call it these days, at GB News. Lots coming your way. I want to talk about the new oil field in just a second. I want to ask you about these drug consumption rooms. What do you make to that? Being able to shoot up, basically, in supervised conditions, good idea? Is it going to stop drug addiction? Is it going to help people or encourage them? I don't know. You give me your thoughts on that. We've got that coming and lots more. But let's kick off, shall we, with the top story. The UK's largest untapped oil field, as you've just been hearing in the headlines, it is going to be developed. Now, this has caused a lot of controversy. There's a lot of people that are very angry about this, saying of, climate problems and all the rest of it. On the flip side, other people arguing actually it's great for the economy, lots of jobs will be created, and also it's good to basically be self-sufficient when it comes to energy supply, as opposed to being dependent on imports from countries that some might argue are not always the best places. Anyway, Peter, where are you on it?
Well, I don't see a problem. If you find oil which is exploitable at a reasonable price within your territory, then you do it. There are lots of arguments about what you do with the revenue and who gets the revenue, but beyond that, it doesn't seem to me to be any kind of difficulty.
So you're not a problem from Peter's side, Aaron?
I would oppose it, but what I would say is lots of the arguments in regards to this find being tapped revolve around energy security. And that is completely misrepresentative of how this works. Rosebank oil fields being exploited will in no way help UK energy security or reduce the cost of energy for the average UK punter. This is energy which will be available on a global market for a global price. There will, of course, be taxes raised, which is a very valuable, important thing to say. But I do think in selling this kind of undertaking, politicians overstate the case for drilling.
Do they?
I think they probably do, yes, but it doesn't alter the fact that, as Aaron rightly says, there will be tax revenue to this country. What this country does with the tax revenue is an interesting point. It's quite often argued, and I think with some strength, that if we'd done what Norway had done with the original tax revenues from North Sea oil that we had over that long period, instead of spending it all on helping make the country more unemployed, then we would be much better off as a country than we are now. And I would like some consideration on that. But no, I think that there's an overstatement by politicians about energy security, which doesn't seem to me to hold much water. But that's probably being made to cover up for the fact that they're all very, very afraid of the net zero people who are going to say leave it in the ground, which is by and large their belief. That itself is based on this weird fallacy that the sky above us is divided, and that if Britain behaves in this way, that all the other countries in the world that are pulling oil and coal and gas out of the ground will either follow our example or will be deeply affected by our minor contribution to keeping it in the ground, which they won't be.
And I just wonder, anyone at home, are you anywhere near Shetland? I think it's just west of Shetland now. Are you in that area? How do you feel having this on your doorstep? Because some people, they don't, you know, I'm just showing you the map, actually. It's all well and good kind of sitting in a remote distance, say, yeah, let's get the drilling commencing. But if it's in your neighbourhood, your back garden, do you support it or not? Just to give you a little bit of context here, they reckon production will begin 2026, 2027. In terms of jobs, 1,600 jobs perhaps at the peak, with about 450 ongoing. When we talk about what we're going to do with this stuff once we've got it produced, do you think there is any merit to a suggestion that, you know what, rather than creating this for export, why don't we create this, produce it for domestic use only? Would you support that kind of thing, or is that market manipulation? Is that anti-capitalism? What?
Well, you sound very sensible saying that, Michelle.
I'm a sensible individual.
And I would say it's better to keep it in the ground. I probably have quite fundamental disagreements with Peter around net zero. But I think that would be a much more interesting conversation, because if you said, look, we import 50% of our gas every year, which we do, and obviously that means that we're so at the behest of volatile energy prices, as we saw last year, doesn't it make sense, given we are a massive producer of energy, to, like you say, store much more of it here? That would be a sensible conversation. Or indeed, to say, well, look, this is going to raise lots of money, we need to exploit it, and let's invest that into retrofitting homes to make them more energy efficient, or research and development in post-carbon technologies. That would all be very interesting. I might not agree with it, but if the government did that, I'd say, OK, that's not the worst thing to happen. But what we would have, I think, instead, is tax breaks for SPIVs, handouts for business allies, friends and cronies of the government, or just fundamental misspending of it. And I think that to me is the real downside. Let's say if there was $5 billion a year generated in tax from this, where would it go? I suspect the Tories would say, let's scrap inheritance tax. So that is precisely why this kind of exploitation of resources is just completely off the table.
Is he being a bit cynical there, do you think?
No, he's just being political. He doesn't like the idea that inheritance tax would be scrapped, and so he derides it as a misuse of the money. It seems to me to be a perfectly possible use of the money. Why you should take money away from people when they die after they've paid tax on it several times already, I'm not sure why this is a particularly just activity. And if you can spare them from it, then all well and good. Lots of other things, from social care to the terrible state of our infrastructure, which needs to be dealt with, which we could spend money on. It would be nice to have the money, but what is fatuous, it seems to me, is to imagine that by keeping it in the ground, we would do anything but harm to ourselves.
Yeah, see, and I think that's very reasonable, do you not? What are you saying?
I think, look, fundamentally, we're moving away from fossil fuels over the next 20 to 30 years in a range of areas, and either we're prepared for that or not. So right now, the big problem, and this is just sort of indisputable, is storage. That's the big problem. We can generate lots of electricity at an ever cheaper rate from things like wind, from solar, but the problem is storage. Once that is overcome, then my worry, Michelle, is actually that countries like the UK and the United States, which are beholden to oil, gas, will be a step behind at places like China, who, yes, have lots of coal being burnt right now, but are also massive global market leaders in renewable technology, because they will have, in 20, 30 years, because of decisions like this, cheaper energy than us. I think a fundamental political flaw over the last 30, 40 years is a lack of long-term planning when it comes to energy, industrial policy, and really, what's this country going to look like, and what kind of living standards, not just will we have, but our children and our grandchildren. And so, like I say, if there was a Tory politician, while this was being exploited, saying, you know what, we're going to spend this on R&D for a post-carbon economy, we're going to invest this in infrastructure like Peter says, I might be more sympathetic. And Peter says, on the one hand, in the 80s, if only we'd had a Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, which I agree with, you can't maintain that position and then say at the same time, oh, well, we're having a smaller bonanza now, but let's instead spend it on scrapping inheritance tax.
Well, I'm not really saying that. I'm just saying that you picked on inheritance tax as a thing, and for political reasons, I wouldn't have thought that's how it's going to go anyway. I think it'd probably be more expensive to get rid of inheritance tax than that. But there are some illusions here among the net zero people. And one, the idea that imposing net zero on our economy isn't going to be quite bad for people's standards of living, for how cold they are in the winter, for how expensive life is, and for employment, because it will be. The other, this wonderful thing, well, if only we could solve the problem of electricity storage, then everything would be all right. It's like, if only we could solve the problem of nuclear fusion, which people have been bashing away at now for decades, and it's always just on the edge of being solved and never is. It's almost like saying, if only we could solve the problem of perpetual motion, we wouldn't have to worry about anything. The trouble is, these are major, really major scientific problems which have not been solved, and we delude ourselves. For instance, I was in the Netherlands the other day, and I had the joy of rushing past on an electric train a coal-fired power station, which was almost certainly producing power to charge electric cars in this country, because we can't do it ourselves, because our own power grid is now so wind dependent that we have to constantly suck power in from countries on the continent to keep the place going. And the more wind dependent we are, and the more, say, electric cars we have, the more dependent we are on imported electricity from places like the Netherlands, and also the French nuclear electricity, which environmentalists disapprove of.
Well, I'm pro-nuclear, don't worry, Peter.
Well, good for you.
We agree on that.
Well, there you go. We end on a point of agreement. What do you make to it all, oil fields? Yes or no? Do you support them? Or are you on the other side saying, whoa there, Tiger, it's all about the climate, pack it in and leave it under the ground? Your thoughts on all of that? I want to talk to you. Talk about digging up the land. HS2, that, again, the row continues. This time, the northern leaders coming together and giving very harsh words to the government if they dare to try and stop the northern leg of it. What do you think? Are we failing the northerners or not?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry, and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. We've just been talking about oil, drilling for oil in this country. Would you support that or not? Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you reach me tonight. I'm with you till 7. Peter Hitchens and Aaron Bastani alongside me till then. Now, let's talk the North, shall we? Because a collective of prominent Northern leaders have been speaking out today. I want to play you Andy Burnham, perhaps the most prominent. Let's listen to what he's saying. It's all about potentially scrapping the northern element of the HS2.
If they pull the plug, they are kind of ripping the heart out of the economic development plan for Greater Manchester and parts of the north. So all options would absolutely be on the table. And I go back to it, I've written to the Prime Minister.
That could be legal action then?
Well, not to consult us, not even to let us kind of put the case.
Well, that's why I wonder, you might get a legal case because of no consultation.
Well, all options would definitely be on the table, you know.
Some of you are saying, Michelle, on your screen it said HS3. Well, yeah, because what I want to ponder tonight is specifically that northern question, because there is another element to HS2, which people do sometimes call HS3, which is, it gets called a few different things, basically, Northern Powerhouse Rail, for example, but the essence of it is connecting the key northern cities. Now, Andy Burnham there speaking very passionately, Aaron, and, you know, the suggestion is, basically, Westminster are almost dictating to the north what is and isn't going to happen. This is quite a lot of speculation at the moment whether or not they were going to scrap this Manchester leg, which would be a very bold move, by the way, because, of course, the conference is going to be in Manchester, the Tory conference, imminently. But anyway, when it comes to north and connecting the north, do you think there's an appetite for that from Westminster to help facilitate that or not?
I think none of this makes any sense whatsoever. So you've had, for instance, the talk of free ports amongst Conservative ministers, particularly from Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor. So what they're seemingly proposing, therefore, is a free port in Liverpool. You have this wonderful new piece of infrastructure with lower labour regulations and standards, which I don't agree with, but that's their agenda. They have a majority. And you get your goods there, and then all of a sudden the train networks, in order to get it to other parts of the country, is going to be second-rate. And I think what your viewers and listeners have to think about is if someone's an investor and they're looking at Liverpool or Leeds or Manchester, are those cities more attractive to invest in than Bilbao, Lyon, Marseille, places with high-speed rail, very good labour markets, very smart, talented people willing to work hard? And I think that question of transport and high-speed rail, or just rail in particular, connections, is a huge one. And I think I really am very sympathetic to what Andy Burnham is saying, because without this, Manchester cannot be a Premier League European city, which is what he wants it to be. It's going to really struggle, like I said, to compete with places like Turin or Milan or Bilbao. So I can understand why he's so angry. I don't think court's the way to go. I think we need to build a political consensus in this country across all parties about the need to build precisely this infrastructure.
Yeah, we touched upon this very briefly a few days ago as well, and one of my panellists was pointing out exactly my thoughts, which is, if indeed these politicians are so passionate about the north, why did all of the commencement of this HS2 start in the south? Why was there so much focus on the London and the southern elements? Why wasn't all of these projects started literally top down, literally north down? And by the way, there'll be loads of people getting in touch saying, stop calling places like Hull and Manchester the north, Michelle, because to a lot of you that is not the north, that is the Midlands, I hear you. But what do you make to this?
Oh, I'm just completely puzzled as to why it should be a high-speed rail, a form of transport this country simply does not need. Look at a map. Great Britain, in terms of population and square mileage, is much, much smaller than France, where high-speed rail has been reasonably successful, or Spain or Germany, and its distances are much shorter. What this country needs, and has not had since the government smashed it up in the 1960s, is a decent low-speed, medium-speed rail system connecting everywhere in the country up in the way that it used to be and ought to be. Ideal, in fact, rail transport is ideal for our very tight, narrow countryside and our very close together cities and our highly developed country. And there's no point in trying to make trains run at 220, 240 miles an hour, which is, by the way, an immensely expensive part of the project, digging the enormous tunnels necessary, making the levels able to cope with it. It's a huge increase in spending. What we need is to restore what I call low-speed one, that's to say a proper railway system connecting everywhere, which this country has not got. It's a simple point. Whether you just believe in the environment is a good thing because you think that the country should be more beautiful and less smelly and less dirty, or whether you believe what Aaron believes, there's no question at all that railways are an immensely superior form of transport to road, not least because of the hugely reduced friction which they have, which enables them to be so much more efficient, and the way in which they can use electricity from any source to run them. So I'm all in favour of building railways, but not high-speed railways. These are political projects. They deliberately, the super high-speed trains are earthbound aircraft. They ignore, turn their backs on the towns they pass. They only go to major cities. They don't serve most people. They carve up the landscape, and they are so incredibly expensive. My own railway line, the Western line to Oxford, billions spent on electrifying it. The trains are now no faster than they were in 1987.
And we talk about the expanding cost. And I think, actually, there's so many different variations of how much that cost is. It depends what you factor in and all the rest of it. But it was certainly supposed to be about, I don't know, say 33 billion. People are now saying it's around 100 upwards of that 100. Now, a lot of these cost increase, people will say it's due to people almost protesting and saying, well, it's not coming through my town, not coming through my village. So then, to Peter's point, then you're having to do a lot more tunnelling. And tunnelling is, of course, a lot more expensive, perhaps. So when
undoubtedly, it's fantastically expensive digging tunnels.
But then, is it valid for people to say, yes, I want this connectivity, yes, I want my cities to be joined up, but not near me? You're not digging up that beautiful bit of kind of gardening I've got over there. You've got to go underneath. Is that valid, or what?
Why should you do that? We have the ghost of a fantastic national rail system still there. Mostly it just needs to be reconnected. In a few cases, there might be some demolition necessary of things which have been, in my view, probably deliberately built to stop it being rebuilt. There's the old Great Central line, which ran up from Marylebone right up through the centre of the country. Most of it's still there waiting to be reconnected. We don't need all this stuff. We had a railway system which was ripped up by morons in 1963, which could be put back, and we should put it back. And it don't need to go at these speeds. The distance between London and Birmingham is 120 miles. These distances don't justify high-speed rail.
Final word.
I entirely agree with Peter's critique of Beeching's Acts and the mistakes of politicians in the 1960s. What I would say, however, is quickly, why are we building high-speed rail is because it does two things. It does allow us to move more quickly between one city and another, but it also allows more capacity on existing lines. So the question is, if we're going to build more lines, should they be fast or slow? I think it makes sense for them to be fast, but there's probably a little interesting middle ground between Peter and I on this.
Well, there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Are you a rail user? Do you want more rail? And if you do you want it to be faster? Does it matter to you when it comes to the speed? Or is it more just about the connectivity and capacity in your mind? Get in touch, let me know. After the break, I've got an interesting one for you. We're going to now have, it seems, our first ever drug consumption room where people can go in there legally, be injecting themselves with heroin, for example. Do you support that? Will it help drug addicts, or will it actually encourage them? You tell me.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Storm Agnes is continuing to provide some quite blustery, very strong winds. Those winds really peaking throughout this evening. Through the Irish Sea, still the potential for 65, 75 mile an hour winds along some very exposed coastal areas and over hills. So do continue to take care. It will be accompanied by some heavy pulses of rain pushing across northern England up into Scotland. Generally elsewhere across Northern Ireland, Wales, southern half of England, it will turn drier into the second half of the night. and the winds will slowly begin to ease out. But there's enough breeze around to really mix up the air, and that will prevent temperatures from dropping too much at all. So a relatively mild start to Thursday. Whilst the strongest winds will be easing tomorrow, it will still be a fairly breezy day for many of us. But once the rain across the far north clears off, a good chunk of us should see a largely dry day, still with a fair amount of cloud around, some bright intervals trying to push their way through before this rain begins to spread its way in from the west later on. Temperatures generally around 17 to 19 degrees Celsius. On Friday, we start to see this area of high pressure want to build its way in from the south. So low pressure is still clinging on in the north, and that will continue to provide some gusty winds at times for parts of Scotland, continuing to bring some showers as well. But once the rain in the far southeast does clear its way off on Friday, a good amount of England, Wales and southern half of Northern Ireland as well should see a fairly fine day with some sunny intervals in the mixture as well. Will be, though, relatively changeable as we head into the weekend. Some showers and longer spells of rain for some of us. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan Tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel. Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Listening.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. The columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, alongside me, as is the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Now let's talk drugs. Scotland is to open the UK's first ever so-called drug consumption room. This is all about basically, apparently, trying to minimise drug deaths and keep people safe whilst using illegal drugs. I am just going to, if I can, while I'm talking to you, bring a picture up of what these drug rooms would look like. They have been approved now by authorities in Glasgow and it is backed by the Scottish Government. I've got to say, it's quite a nice looking facility. You can see on there, I'll describe it if you're listening in, you go. You've got a nice reception area. You've got an interview room, you've got an aftercare room, you've got what they call a recovery room, a room that they call injecting, and then another consulting room. Peter Hitchens, what do you make to this?
Well, it's deliberately condoning the breaking of the criminal law by the state. And this is what governments have been doing and police have been doing for a very long time, the issue of drugs. They simply say, well, we're not enforcing our laws anymore, and we know this. But now there are other developments, such as the supposed testing of drugs at festivals, which the police allow. And now this. The message it sends is quite simple, that the government has no intention whatever of trying to interdict the use of drugs by people. It will concentrate on the futile and provenly ineffectual attempt to interdict the supply of drugs, which never works if you do nothing about demand, and the problem will get worse. But what annoys me about this is the way that the current situation is depicted as a regime of brutal prohibition, where people who take illegal drugs are constantly persecuted by the police and their lives are made miseries by the law. This isn't the case. It hasn't been the case for decades. In most of this country, including Scotland, there's been effective decriminalisation of the use of drugs, and that is the reason for the catastrophe in Scotland and indeed in the rest of the country, the large numbers of people taking these disastrous substances and ruining their lives, those of their families and those of their neighbours. And it won't do anything other than continue. When we first began to experience heroin in this country, back in the 1960s, hardly anybody used it. Now, after 60 years of this kind of liberal policy, many, many thousands of people use it. What do you expect? It will just continue that process.
Do you support these rooms, Aaron?
Scotland has a huge problem, Glasgow in particular, but they have a huge problem, and I think it is important to be open-minded with regards to solutions when you have a problem on that scale. So I think Scotland is very much the drug death capital of Europe. I think its problem is basically, on a per-head basis, 4 times worse than Norway, who are second. I think, with regards to what Peter said, there is a conservative argument, say, against the decriminalisation of cannabis. You could say, we are where we are, some people use it, most people don't, most of the time, and I don't back decriminalisation on that basis. I think it's very different with regards to this in Scotland because there is a huge problem, and so a small C conservative approach of, well, look, let's not do anything dramatic here, doesn't really wash because, as I just mentioned, Glasgow in particular, but Scotland as a nation, is the drugs death capital of Europe.
But I'm not saying let's not do anything dramatic. I'm saying let's start again enforcing the very severe criminal laws which are on the statute books of this country against the possession of these drugs. I think in the case of Class A drugs, the maximum prison sentence for possession is 10 years. And I doubt very much whether that sentence or anything remotely resembling has been applied anywhere in the United Kingdom for the past 30 years. We don't do it. We don't enforce the law. As a result, more people take the drugs. If you think that fewer people will take drugs as a result of this policy, then I'm afraid you're deluded. More people will take drugs, and the tragedies which follow from drug taking will increase. This has been the history of the past 60
Can I ask a question, Peter?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, sorry, Michelle, to pinch your job for a moment, but here's the thing. Obviously, something quite unique is happening in Scotland, Peter.
No, it's been tried in lots of other places.
No, but that's
Switzerland, for instance.
But no, this is precisely the point. So, Scotland, Glasgow, Dundee have a particular issue, and what you're saying about the laws on the statute book not being applied, that is the case for the whole of the UK. So there's clearly something quite unique happening in Scotland, relatively unique happening in Scotland. So surely you're not just going to have a uniform sort of approach to say, well, Hay on Wye is the same as Glasgow when it comes to deaths from heroin, because it clearly isn't. So I would have thought you'd have a bit more of a nuanced
but in no
response.
case, so take another example. In no case in this country is there a drought as a result of an excess of rain. In no case in this country or anywhere else do more people die of drugs because drugs are more easily available and there's less action taken to discourage or prohibit or deter them from taking them. If you have a policy which fails to deter, discourage and prohibit, you will get more drug takers. And whatever the reason is for the higher level of deaths in Scotland, it isn't the ferocious enforcement of the law against possession of Class A drugs, because there is no such ferocious enforcement, and there has not been within pretty much living memory. So it's a fantasy to imagine that actually setting up a publicly funded, and this is from law-abiding people, a publicly funded centre where people can openly take illegal drugs in front of employees of the government, that is going to send a message saying, don't take these drugs. we disapprove of this, it's bad, and we think it's wrong.
No,
it is not going to send that message.
My point is, and I am open to it not working, my point is they should try it, because obviously the state of the...
Well, why should they try it? It's completely and utterly unreasonable. It's unconnected what possible connection is there?
Peter,
unless it were the case, which it is not, that there had been severe enforcement of the laws against drug possession in Scotland, which this would now undermine for the past 10 years, unless that had been the case, how could it possibly be suggested that weakening the enforcement still further was going to make the drug problem smaller?
Your argument...
No, answer the question. How could it possibly? I long to know.
I wanted to ask a question, which is, your point is that we have a problem with rising use of drugs in this country over the last 50 to 60 years because of a lack of application of what is on the statute by law enforcement. Yes. Then why is it so much worse in Glasgow? If it's monocausal...
I don't know.
If the thing that is causing this is a lack of application of the laws...
Aaron, I absolutely don't know why it's so much worse, but I do know why it's not so much worse, and it's not so much worse because the law's been enforced, because it hasn't been. What we can also do is point to other countries and the experience of other civilised, democratic, law-governed countries, such as Japan and South Korea, where enforcement of laws against drug possession has been accompanied by much lower drug use. And this is something we do not do in this country. We ignore this evidence. We have nothing to do. We pay no attention to it. We just had a parliamentary committee, the Home Affairs Committee, reporting on drugs in this country, despite the fact that I and others wrote to them and said, will you please look into this? They didn't even look. They're not interested because there is such a huge drug decriminalisation lobby in this country that nobody wants to know any evidence which suggests it's a mistake. They don't want to know. And so the mistake continues unprevented. And this is another stage, serial episode of this mistake.
Sandra has been in touch saying, this will never stop drug use in Scotland. I am a Scot and I'm a retired NHS employee. She says 30-odd years ago, they thought that issuing methadone would solve the drug problem. It was never a solution. In fact, actually, she says people just use that as a free top-up, and they continued with their other drug use. What is the answer then, Sandra? We're sitting here pontificating. Why is this drug use so much worse in places like Glasgow? Do you know the answer? Do you know what it is in Glasgow that is specifically turning, or so it seems, turning more people to drugs? Just to give you a little bit of context as well, the rate of drug poisoning deaths in Scotland was 2.7 times as high as the UK average. So, I mean, this is clearly an issue, and what we're trying to debate is what is the solution to it? These drug rooms, just to be absolutely clear, as Aaron was saying, this is a pilot, so they're going to be doing this and looking to see whether or not it does indeed make any difference. Will it? I don't know, you tell me. After the break, I've got one for you that I want to talk about. Migrants in Greece. They are now going to be putting their so-called illegal migrants to work. We've got loads of job vacancies here. Currently, people are languishing in hotels. Should we be getting them into the workforce? You tell me.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Dewbs & Co. Me, Michelle Dewberry, till 7, columnist for The Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens. Alongside me, as is the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Kenneth says, here in the West Country, we would be happy with a rail line and stations. How about levelling up us as well? Steve says, one thing I've never understood, why don't we have double-decker trains, like what they do in Holland? That, of course, would increase capacity. Yep, lots of support in terms of opening up those oil fields.
Tunnels in Holland, Michelle.
There you go. Well, Peter just answered your question. Not enough, not very many tunnels in Holland.
No, no hills.
Lots of you saying, all of these people that are against the oil fields and the drilling, do they realise that so much of what they wear, for example, is derived from things like oil? On this drug thing, Jason says, what are you talking about? Allowing people to take heroin? Give me strength. Jerry says they are now condoning the possession of illegal drugs too. Deborah, though, says, I think it will help. It could perhaps help take this off the street. What a sad world we live in. Ian says, what about alcohol? That is one of the most horrible drugs there is, and booze plays a huge part in all sorts of crime. Why is nobody focusing on that? Lena says, any society which legalises drug consumption is a failed society. Gwilym, I think that's how you say your name. I have doubts about drug rooms, but my question is, why on earth is it so expensive, into the millions? What is it? Is it a 5-star drug den, you're asking? Tracy says, what about when one of these people dies because of what they're injecting? What then? Do we sue the government or what? Interesting perspectives from you guys at home. Let's talk Greece. They are set to put their undocumented migrants to work on some massive infrastructure projects they have there. They reckon that this is basically going to tackle labour shortages and make productive people out of the so-called illegal migrants, their words. Aaron, this is a conversation that's to be had in this country. You've got God knows how many people now in hotels. The cost there are about £8 million a day. Those people can't work while they're being processed. I mean, you know, good luck getting processed with the backlogs the way it is. Should they be allowed to work in this country?
My instinct says yes. The example being set by Greece here, though, does give me pause for concern. I think they should be working for the minimum wage, maybe 10 hours a week. There are, however, major downsides if you had en masse...
That's a bit random. Why 10 hours a week at minimum wage? Where do you come up with that from?
Well, let's say you have a small town and all of a sudden you have 200-300 new workers arrive who are working 30-40 hours a week. That will have a massive impact on the existing labour market and it'll serve to push wages down. So I think it's good that it keeps them active. They get to earn some cash. So they're not necessarily so dependent on small handouts from the state. But I would be worried about the downward compression on wages. So, for example, in the example of Greece, they're looking to use them to build key infrastructure. I would be very angry if that kind of measure was adopted here and it was pushing down the wages of UK nationals who are day labourers or electricians or whatever. So that would be my concern, pushing down wages of UK nationals. So I think trying it a little bit would be a sensible start. Using them en masse for big infrastructure projects, I think that's probably unwise.
Peter?
I wish I thought it would make any difference either way, honestly. Huge numbers of people, I believe, are already working illegally here, probably came here saying that they were seeking asylum. Our asylum system is so completely gummed up that it is effectively doesn't really exist. It's just another gimmick idea, it seems to me, that has no future. We have completely failed in this country to cope with or make any sense of mass immigration now, really since the new Labour era. And every time everybody comes up with a bright new idea, I think, well, how long will it take before that one goes down the plumbing? So I'm afraid I can't work up any enthusiasm for this at all.
Yeah, see, we've got quite high numbers of vacancies in this country. You've got about 1 million vacancies. You've got 2.58 million people in the UK that are economically inactive due to things like long-term sick. We spoke about that. A lot of this now is around the mental health situation. Is there a part of you that would be concerned? Look, you know what? You can get in this boat, right? Guys in France, here, listen up. You can get in this boat, you can get across the channel, and then when you get to the UK, you're going to get a 4-star hotel and you're going to be able to now go to work and earn even more money to top yourself up. Is there a part of you that worries, hang on a second, when it comes to incentivising people, because surely what we should be trying to do is de-incentivise those crossings for a variety of reasons, would you worry that we're going to incentivise those crossings?
Well, that's what the Greeks have said, and I think that's a very real possibility. And like I say, you've got really two ways of doing this. Either you pay a really decent wage...
But that's going to incentivise them more.
Quite. Or you pay them a very low wage, which is going to compress the wages of other UK-based workers. So, like I say, I think the middle ground is to, again, perhaps try it. I'm sounding like the small C Conservative here rather than maybe Peter. Perhaps try it, but I think using it and adopting it on the scale that Greece seems to be doing seems, like I say, unwise. Particularly building an airport, building key national infrastructure in such a way, it's incredibly slapdash. I mean, it's not really something you'd associate with a European country. No, for instance, somewhere like Kenya, the Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi was built by prison labour under the British, I believe, in the 50s and the 60s. It's very strange if all of a sudden a similar modus operandi, I'm not suggesting it's the same as prison labour, but a similar modus operandi was adopted to build infrastructure here in Europe. I mean, this isn't how first world countries are meant to build infrastructure. So I'm very pessimistic about what they're doing, but I think having the right to work for a short amount of time, I think would probably solve more problems than it creates.
What do you think to that at home? Do you think that actually, Martin, he's got in touch saying, Michelle, what about, why does work have to involve money, etc.? You're pondering the question about why can't we get them doing the things that the councils haven't got time for, cutting hedges, litter picking, ditch digging. But I mean, you'd have to pay people to do that, surely. Paul says, why don't we get them to allow them to work, but then take some of that money to pay towards their contribution and their upkeep? I'm not sure how that would work. Who's this? Again, people are saying, like Jan, she's saying the same thing. You could actually get people to work and take their... I mean, even as I'm saying it, it doesn't feel
These things are all based on the assumption that we have some real control over the people who arrive here, which I don't think we do. I mean, how many, for instance, of the people crossing the Channel, we think or claim to know how many are coming across, but how many are just arriving without ever being counted? And then we have the enormous problem of vast legal migration, which has been going on since the Blair era. And huge numbers of people are in the country, and yet somehow or other we don't seem to be able to solve our labour shortage problems. It's a fascinating subject and one which we could spend all evening discussing. But what seems to me to be the case, beyond doubt, is that in all aspects of it, everywhere, we have completely failed to do anything sensible at all. And we've lost control of it. And this doesn't seem to me to be any way of getting back control of it.
Les says, Michelle, you already know, we all know that people work in, for example, car washes in the black economy. I'm always suspicious about nail bars. Do you see those nail bars? You get a lot of, for example, Vietnamese or whatever nail bars, and they really do very cheap prices compared to some of the other places. I often find myself wondering about the people that work there. Is that by choice? Are they here by choice? What is going on there?
What about one of our most flourishing industries, the hydroponic cannabis farms, which dot this country, probably the most effective part of British agriculture? I don't imagine they're legally run. Or necessarily run by people who've come here legally. There's huge amounts of stuff going on in this country which is simply unsupervised.
I'm just listening to what you guys have got to say. This has really got a lot of you talking. A lot of you is saying, Wallace said, Michelle, I've got the solution. You've just been talking about HS2 not being to time and to budget. Well, you could use certain people coming in to get them working on that. Some people say make them work for the benefits that they receive.
Make them work.
Yeah, but this is the problem. We do give benefits out to people, don't we, in this country, without them having to do any work. Who's this? Barbara's just straight down the line. No, they should not be able to work. This is unfair and infuriating, she says, to suggest. Look, that's all I have got time for. Aaron Bastani, thank you very much for your company. Peter Hitchens, thank you as well for yours. Very importantly, thank you for watching and for listening tonight. I appreciate it. As always, do not go anywhere. Richard Tice up next. Night-night.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Storm Agnes is continuing to provide some quite blustery, very strong winds. Those winds really peaking throughout this evening. Through the Irish Sea, still the potential for 65, 75 mile an hour winds along some very exposed coastal areas and over hills. So do continue to take care. It will be accompanied by some heavy pulses of rain pushing across northern England up into Scotland. Generally elsewhere across Northern Ireland, Wales, southern half of England, it will turn drier into the second half of the night and the winds will slowly begin to ease out. But there's enough breeze around to really mix up the air and that will prevent temperatures from dropping too much at all. So a relatively mild start to Thursday. Whilst the strongest winds will be easing tomorrow, it will still be a fairly breezy day for many of us. But once the rain across the far north clears off, a good chunk of us should see a largely dry day, still with a fair amount of cloud around, some bright intervals trying to push their way through before this rain begins to spread its way in from the west later on. Temperatures generally around 17 to 19 degrees Celsius. On Friday, we start to see this area of high pressure want to build its way in from the south. So low pressure is still clinging on in the north, and that will continue to provide some gusty winds at times for parts of Scotland, continuing to bring some showers as well. But once the rain in the far southeast does clear its way off on Friday, a good amount of England, Wales and southern half of Northern Ireland as well should see a fairly fine day with some sunny intervals in the mixture as well. Will be, though, relatively changeable as we head into the weekend. Some showers and longer spells of rain for some of us. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News.